Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Crossroads, and I'd like to welcome my guests from Canada. Welcome, Robert Klinck.
Hi, Arnie. Great to see you again.
No worries. Pleased to have you, Robert. How are things in eastern areas of Canada?
Well, some people are excited. They think that the COVID strictures are coming down, and they're actually exuberant. They're ecstatic
Mm-hmm.
because the dates have been set for the removal of some of the control measures. But we've seen this repeatedly,
Mm-hmm.
that the date approaches and then they find a pretext for reestablishing or even reinforcing the
Mm-hmm.
controls. So
Yeah.
people are seemingly endlessly gullible because they can have this done to them, 5, 10 times over, and they still live in a fog of hope. It's been called hopium. I think it's a good term.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly right. Thank you, Robert. Welcome, Wallace Klinck.
Oh, well, hi, Arnie. We're having a bit of a cloudy day today. It looks like it could rain. I hope we don't get anything more violent, but it's been very hot, and that could bring on possibly violent thunderstorms or even potentially tornadoes.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what's going to happen, but anyway, it's pretty
No
nice
worries.
out there right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Um,
we've
yeah,
just had we've had about an inch or more, maybe an inch and a half of rain the last 24
wow.
hours. We had a good lot of showers yesterday overnight. And
Hmm.
really, to me, beautiful. Beautiful. We put some seedlings out to face the music overnight, and then they should be going in the ground today. So there's plenty of growth happening where we are going into
I
winter.
think in Australia that should be very welcome.
It certainly is, certainly is. These past couple of seasons, I attribute the variability in climate to sunspot activity. And if there's less solar flares, less sunspots, then there's less variability. And so, to me, the last couple of 2 or 3 winters have been fairly consistent. Not bitterly cold, and our summer's not bitterly hot. So, to me, that's sort of falling into it. So, I think the sun has got 90 to 95% of the influence over affecting the Earth's climate, and not CO2. CO2 is continuing to climb, and yet we've had 18 months of deindustrialising of the West. We've had 18 months of lockdown, and here it is. The CO2 is still going up, and yet the weather is cooling. So it's an inconsistent thesis, climate change, but it's all part of the narrative of catastrophe, the narrative of a crisis that is there to bring about significant political change in the world, and I believe that's our consideration for today. I'll do a run through the papers, and let's take a look and see what's going on. In interesting, this article here: Liberals vent the fury over the party's Christian purge. Now, this lady, Nicole Flint, has highlighted in South Australia, she was Liberal and she resigned because of the abuse she was receiving in the party. But what's actually gone on is that the Liberal Party, which has a membership of about 5,000 in the state, it's not a lot, but they've decided to remove terminated membership of 150 and possibly a further 400 removed from the party because of their political views. Now, this is a political party, and the thing is that these people who are members of the party are conservatives, and this is the party that presents itself as conservative when in actual fact it's full-blown communist. Let's call it for what it is. They are Marxists, they are cultural Maoists, and they're attempting to impose a dictatorship on this state, and they do not like the fact that a conservative party, which is Maoist or communist, has got conservative members. And so they're having a purge. And that's a very public purge. And they're currently in government. And I think it's a telling time, because if we work through the news services, we'll see that the Christians are finally being shown the door. These who are tied in with conservative groups. Project The Journalistic Reign of Terror. I can't remember what that was about, so I'm going to just leave that one alone. But another crisis we're facing, and this is to do with finance. This is to do, Queensland Premier, that lady there, massive amounts of borrowing during the lockdown. And so they're imposing huge amounts of new debt onto posterity, onto future generations, and they really don't care. They're going to cause the whole nation, the whole states, all the states just to be so indebted to central banks, and that's their policy. So the second crisis, we've got the we've got the philosophical crisis. The second crisis is the financial crisis, and so we keep going. And of course, the third crisis is the lockdowns. There's Macron there, and doing what he's doing. New cases in Victoria. Victoria's only just come out of a significant 2-week complete shutdown in a city of 5.5 million people. This is interesting here, and this is the Epoch Times talking about the extreme drought conditions in California. Now, I mentioned the other week that California was draining its dams. California, 3 weeks ago, was draining its dams, and there's a report on it. California is draining its dams. This is dated the 21st of May. That's 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago they were draining their dams, and here it is that California is facing extreme drought, water restrictions, and massive increases in the price of water. That's policy. What are we looking at? We're looking at man-induced famine. Man-induced famine. In my view, that's what's going on. Gateway Pundit, yes, I think this lady releasing some information, Fox 26 reporter, about censorship from Fox Corporation boss to cease and desist, where she was actually not towing the political line of Fox News. And I think that's very important to recognise that these news services have a political line and they're not interested in truth. Rebel News, this was in regard to what was it? It was in regard to a pastor being arrested. Again, family in a vehicle, he's sorted out. These are people who are starting to resist the lockdown. They're starting to hold underground church services in order for them to worship. This is where it is in Canada. This is where it is. Attempting to hold underground church services. They're having drones, helicopters, all those sorts of police state spy tools in order to stop Christians from exercising their religion. Very, very interesting. This one here, I was directed towards this. This is the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, and in particular, the deadly cost of lockdowns. This is the brochure that they've produced, and I'm going to commend that to our viewers to actually look at that up. So look at the website, jccf.ca, and the deadly cost of lockdowns. There it is, the brochure that you might be able to use to provide yourselves with relevant information about what's actually transpiring, what is actually going on in the world. I would call it a cultural revolution. I think Mao's Cultural Revolution is a timely title because it implies, if you like, preparation to suppress. I understand that in Pakistan people are being refused electrical power if they have not been vaccinated. Now, in Australia, just last week, our federal government provided a vaccine certificate. I believe it's an electronic form in which you are able to substantiate your current vaccine status. Now, this is our federal government. So it's a vaccine passport by another name, and this is a conservative government, supposedly conservative, but in actual fact, Maoist. That's what it is. It's a Maoist government, and it's introducing totalitarianism into Australia. Anyway, your thoughts, please, Robert Klinck.
Well, you're talking about crises, Arnie. The climate crisis, they're still alleging that the temperature is increasing. It was global warming for a long time, and then they just made it climate change, which doesn't seem too offensive. Climate changes, doesn't it? Everybody knows that. If you have any knowledge of the history of the Earth, you know that the changes have been very dramatic. But I heard the other day some fellow in Britain predicting that, 40% of the current population of the world would be living in unbearable heat within 70 years. Well, it's another prediction. We've had so many of these. We had Greta Thunberg telling us a couple of years ago that we only had 12 years left and the Earth was a goner. Well, now that we get a little bit closer to the date she was pointing at, it doesn't look like a very good prediction, does it? So that's what they do. But the thing is that scientists, I think all climatologists, recognize that we've gone into something called a Maunder minimum. And this is a time of decreased sunspot activity. In fact, I think it's really decreased to hardly any sunspots at all. But the effect of that has been recognized, and it is that the temperature of the Earth falls. So at the same time, you still have this alarmist propaganda going on about the horrors of the warming of the Earth to come. All responsible climate scientists recognize that the sun's activity is causing the Earth's temperature to fall. So it's very hard to credit any of the official lines we're being given. It's fake news in spades, and it's unrelenting. The COVID crisis is the same thing. They're relaxing the controls in many countries now. In the UK, they said that they were going to, I think, go out of the controls completely by the 21st of June. But now Boris Johnson had just said that, alas, there's a new variant. I think it's the Indian variant. It's got some kind of a Greek letter attached to it. So now it's a Delta or something like that. But so because this new variant is showing up, which they estimate is more virulent than the original COVID. They're always estimating it to be a deteriorating situation, getting worse and worse. So he has put off the remission of the controls for a month. And there are a lot of very irate Brits right now. I don't know how this is going to go down, but they always seem to get away with it. There's enough of an element in the population who will just accede to any position that the government is putting forth, that the ability to stop these politicians from their disastrous policies just doesn't seem to come off. But of course, as they become more and more extreme, and as they are shown to have been dishonest enough times, then the confidence of the population will tend to diminish. We just had the G7 meeting over in Britain, and our Prime Minister, who is having clergymen arrested in Canada because of COVID, because clergymen are insisting that they will have church services. Well, he flew over there on a gigantic jet. I presume he brought along a retinue of some kind, probably a bunch of drunken newspaper men, media people. And but he's over there and he's fraternizing with all these world leaders. He's patting them on the back. Nobody's wearing a mask. It's a great party atmosphere. So it's been exposed completely as one rule for the rulers and another rule for the ruled. And this can't go on forever. People have to catch on to the fact that this is hypocrisy, such as rarely been equaled in history.
Thank you for that, Robert. That's certainly a telling comment about the humbug and the hypocrisy of our leaders, and I certainly endorse that. Your thoughts, please, Wallace Klinck.
Can be no doubt about it. I'm sure that this whole COVID thing and the things that have surrounded it, accompanied it, is probably equivalent almost to the fraud that the financial system itself is. The system which has really made it possible to bring about all these abuses of the common people. So, I mean, we have to remember that there are people in the world who feel that the world is to be administered by the elite, the intelligentsia. They don't have any concept, it seems, of natural law. They don't like natural law because natural law tends to displace them from their alleged position of power and authority and credibility. If you have to bow to an outside source of truth, a source of credibility, then you're weakened in your ability to control other people. So they definitely, and that is what the materialists actually is a prime example of. They want to run things according to their concepts, or their concept either real or alleged, as to how the world actually does and should revolve. We're Johnny come lately. We were created a long time ago, but the universe existed long before that. So there's some prior cause, some prior power, some prior intellect, purpose, cause, consciousness that precedes mankind and exceeds mankind. We shouldn't be letting our egos run wild and think that we are the authors of all things or can be the authors of all things. The natural world should be regarded as something that can function without the intervention of gigantic egos within the human community. As a matter of fact, history has shown that when people begin to acquire power and become interventionists to control other people, they usually make a disaster of things because they're operating without full knowledge. They're operating on the basis of ego, and ego does not necessarily have any relationship to realism. So, and we have the London School of Economics that was established by people with that particular controlling mentality. And one of the founders said that it would become its graduates would become the controllers of the coming socialist world state. That's the Fabian socialist conception. It's all man-centered. And I think if we're going to assume that man has control over everything, can do all things, we're going to fall into a very deep well.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Wally. That's quite profound. I wanted to touch on the profundity of canon law, the profundity, and I'm going to cut across to a story. A story here is about Lord Acton and John Emmerich Edward Dahlberg Acton, and he saw that there was a problem with too much power, and he observed it, and he observed that power was a corrupting influence, that the more power individuals held, the greater the level of corruption, the greater temptation. It was this is the nature of man. It doesn't matter who you are, if you're given this power. Now, he was actually writing to Bishop Mandel Creighton. They were discussing the power of the Holy Father. And in this discussion, this is what he said. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Great men are almost always bad men. Now, he's looking at the canon. He's looking at the natural law of this is what happens with people. This is what happens. And we've got to consider that if we give this much power to our politicians, is it going to tempt them? And is the temptation so great that they actually can't, if you like, resist the temptation? They will be corrupted. And the way I see it, I mean, the Cultural Revolution in Mao's China, anything between 40 and 80 million people were murdered in order for him to hold power. This is Mao's China. This is the Cultural Revolution that the West is actually heading towards. This is the corruption that went on in Mao's China, and you say, oh, that was just Mao and that was Mao's China, and those people needed liquidating. I mean, seriously? Seriously, you want to say that? What about Stalin? Was he any better? Was he any better? In actual fact, he was not. He was no better. He went through a period of, under his administration, his dictatorship, they went through a period of purging. And again, the millions. Was it 40 million? Was it 60 million?
30 to 40 million in China and Russia.
Yeah. Solzhenitsyn said that the period of time of the 1900s, the 20th century, as many as 200 million were murdered by their own governments because of this law that Acton warned about, this law of power. 200 millions were murdered by their own government. And I think that that's as much canon law as you need to understand to recognise that if you allow this much power in the hands of your government, of your politicians, to the point where they're not accountable to the people, then this is what you've got to expect, because this is human nature. This is the nature. You try and train a dog, and you know that there are rules about dogs and how you've got to work with a pack animal, work with an animal that's actually used to instinctively, this is what it does. And so it is with human beings. Now, the study of this, the science of this, you could describe it as this society's dynamics, social dynamics. It's a study of the science of how people get on and the nature, the canon law, the natural laws that people actually operate under, including their weaknesses. We've got to recognise that, and we've got to be warned that this is what's actually going on in front of us. And if we're so foolish as not to look to the observable truths that the historians have warned us about, then this is the outcome. We will go through exactly the same outcome. Your thoughts, please, Robert Klinck.
Well, the comments about the Cultural Revolution in China, I have a personal perspective on, because my son is in China now. He's married to a Chinese girl. This girl's grandfather was a doctor, and he went blind. And during the Cultural Revolution, he was hauled out in front of these screaming mobs and humiliated. He was a philanthropist. He was a very wealthy man, but he had a place where he took care of orphans. He had an orphanage for about 100 kids, I think, on his property. But because they got these young people infused with the idea that they had a grip on truth, and in order to understand what truth was, all they had to do was be inspired by a little red book and understand that power comes out of the end of a gun. They hauled all kinds of people like this doctor in front of mobs. The doctor went home after that experience and hanged himself. I was in the house where he did that. and one of his brothers was shot. Uh, 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 I think that another one was cut in pieces and hung in a tree. Just terrible stories. Some of them survived. There were 12 siblings there, and one is still sympathetic to communism. The others have rejected it completely. In fact, one of the uncles deliberately sent his kids to Australia to be educated because he says, I don't trust the regime in China. This terrible situation could return. It doesn't look as if it is now, but he was just so traumatized by what he went through. I think he was sent out to the country for about 15 years, and he says there's a 15-year hole in my life. They just took that away from me. So it's something that not many people in the West seem to be aware of anymore. It's a tragedy. You know, the only evil in the world is Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. But as evil as he may have been, there are examples elsewhere that are completely ignored. And the media don't advert to these atrocities that have taken place. It's a very strange thing. They'll make a huge deal of some crimes against humanity, but they ignore others. And it's sort of an indication that the media has a very strong communist bias because they tend to suppress knowledge of the crimes of communism, which are the greatest crimes of the 20th century for sure. More people died at the hands of communism than anywhere else. And you're talking about Lord Acton. Well, the problem is that great men that he referred to are men who don't recognize limitations. They don't recognize limitations on themselves. They become so egotistical that they think that they can dictate other people's existences to them. And this is a source of this terrible evil that comes along. Mao was the same way. Stalin was the same way. Pol Pot was the same way. All self-proclaimed geniuses, and once they got their dictatorships going, there were many people who would acknowledge that they were the greatest geniuses who ever lived because they were terrorized. If they contradicted the leader, their lives were not likely to last very long. So this is a tendency that has gone on even in the Western world. The London School of Economics that Wally referred to, these people were atheists. They were, generally speaking, very egotistical. They were not empathetic personalities. They were persuaded of their intellectual superiority, and they assumed that because they were intellectually superior, they were the natural people to decide how the world should be run. And unfortunately, we are absolutely infested with people of this character now. There has been a deliberate campaign to create them. I don't know if you've heard of the Common Purpose organization in Britain, but they set their goal to create 1 million change agents for the society of the UK. And it looks as if they've done a pretty good job of creating them. Well, these activities are not done in isolation. We have a world government, and it is pursuing the same policies in every country in the world, particularly actively in technologically advanced countries, because they want to bring them under control and they want to suppress the aspiration to be independent that came with the creation of a substantial middle class. So right now we're in the process of seeing that middle class repressed. And it's very similar to what happened in communist countries in the last century. COVID has become a pretext for this sort of driving down the level of existence of humanity. And it's quite obvious that that is a long-range plan, that it's not that we're living now in a temporary time of trouble, but this time of trouble is intended to create a new algorithm, a new model for society. And this is going to be a system of intense control, of the end of any concept of personal privacy, personal property, personal initiative. It's all going to be surveyed, and it's all going to be dictated. So this defect in the human personality that leads some individuals to think that they have some right to dictate the lives of others is expressing itself with a vengeance right now in what is being done with this COVID control and the prospects that we are heading into something called a Great Reset. And if you look at the whole thing as a succession of events, you can see it all holds together. And, you know, you shouldn't look at history as being episodic and disconnected, because what takes place in history is largely planned. And the events we're going through at the present time have their antecedents in long-range planning. Many people have looked into this, have shown how everything that's being done today was being projected not only last year, but as many as 15 years ago, because these plans have been laid out for a long time, and they're now being imposed on the world. And we're at a state with the technology of that for surveillance that it must be stopped, or we're going to enter a phase of human civilization that's going to be the death of the individual.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Robert. I found that the Common Purpose website, commonpurpose.org, for those that are interested. They can go there, and there's a write-up about who they are and their intentions, and design and intent is similar to the London School of Economics, of course, which is to develop the supposed leaders of the future. And this is what we're experiencing. We're actually experiencing it in the multiple crises we're going through. Supposedly the climate crisis, supposedly COVID, and of course what's coming at us is also the financial crisis. Anyone who follows what's going on economically in Australia, the price of houses, the cost of houses is going through the roof, and the government is imposing tax after tax after tax. So of course what's going to happen is that the level of indebtedness of our children, our progeny, is going to be so great that they will never ever own a home. And if they do happen to try to, they're going to be taxed so heavily that they're going to be taxed into oblivion and destitution. Your thoughts, please, Wallace Klinck.
Yes, they have this idea that property is evil because it gives people the ability to exploit and dominate other human beings. There is some merit to that, but it is a very misleading proposition, and certainly very dangerous if it leads to practical policies based upon that concept that property is some kind of an evil. Property is the only way that genuine production for the benefit of mankind can occur, because property is something that you administer yourself. You must be very careful to administer it in a sound and productive manner, because otherwise you're going to lose it. So it's extremely important to understand that property is absolutely essential, personal property, absolutely essential to a proper functioning human society. But the big problem is that in the administration of property in the so-called capitalist system, all systems are capitalist because they require tools. But the problem is that it leads to monopoly, a concentration, increasing concentration of power. Whereas that is because the way the system works under the existing financial system, everything is brought increasingly to the center. The economy should be dispersive. The things that happen within the economy in terms of production should simply flow out to the community. Now, a portion of that flow should be due to the actual contribution that individuals have made to it. Their wages, salaries, and debt is perfectly legitimate. People can make contractual arrangements, and certain rewards can be attached to that. The punishments are the consumer's rejection of the results. If there are to be punishments, that's where it should lie. So you see, if you look at nature, different organisms interact with each other. Certain things eventuate as a consequence of that interaction. And those consequences simply dissipate. They go out into the larger community, if you want. Not in our society. The more you get based on the accumulation of money, the more you are able to accumulate power for yourself. And that stops up the abundance of the kingdom. It stops up the flow of goods and services, which should naturally occur. And so in other words, well, if you looked at a society, it should simply be a lot of people interacting with each other, producing things, earning the right to claim certain things. But because we can produce far, far more than we can obtain with our income, or earned income, there has to be a means of distributing that surplus, that extra wealth. And what we have done is we have fallen for the ruse that the financial system carries the answer to that problem. All we have to do is simply go to certain people who have locked themselves upon, they have secured for themselves the ability to control financial credit, which is the ability to control the mechanisms of production. So that what we've done is we have simply concentrated power instead of distributing it. You distribute wealth, you distribute power. You stop up the flow of wealth, and you concentrate power in the hands of the people who have been able to cause the scarcity. And that is a completely an inversion of natural law, of natural process. That's not the way it works in nature. You'll see in nature, organisms acquire certain access to goods and services, but that access is not monopolized generally. You don't get certain animals collecting around the source of wealth and fending everybody out, all the other animals away from it. Everyone tends to have access. And that's just the natural way for human beings in association to function. But because we have tied everything to money, which is scarce relative to its actual needs, because the people who have the control of issuing it, creating it as credit, have monopolized the power to do so. So Douglas wrote a book, Major Douglas, the founder of social credit, wrote a book, probably his most, possibly his most important book, The Monopoly of Credit. There's real credit and financial credit. Real credit is the ability of individuals to create. Financial credit is the ability to provide the basis for them to be enabled to create. And that has been monopolized. So we have got a very unnatural economy. It's right that the critics are probably at least they have an intuition that something's wrong. They don't understand what's wrong. Marx was quite wrong when he attributed the problem to the private ownership of the means of production. It's not the ownership of the means of production that is the problem. It is access to the flow of wealth that proceeds from real wealth that proceeds from productive power.
Yeah, exactly right, Wally. That's a very, very important point, and that's why when Douglas proposed the national dividend, what he was doing was he was opening up the floodgates, if you like. He was opening up where there would be a sufficiency in the hands of the individual to buy what is actually produced. Buy what is produced without incurring debt, without actually being beholding to those who have monopolised credit creation. The idea of that national dividend is handing a little packet of power to each person. Each person becomes, if you like, a mini capitalist. I read a few months back, there was a book I received on John D. Rockefeller, and on the basis of his income for a year, at one stage, I think it was 1890s or something, Rockefeller was able to garnish from the American economy more than the entire USA administration. The actual entire administration was so many hundreds of millions of dollars, and Rockefeller had amassed more than that in that year. He had amassed, and that's the power of monopolising. That's that monopolising power that we've actually got to consider. When it gets to that point of absurd, where one person has more personal power than the entire administration of the United States, of course they can exert enormous influence over the administration. The first thing they do in the case of influence is, of course, media. If they're advertising through media, then the media is going to be compliant. If they own the media, they're going to be even more compliant. It gets to the point, and that's why media monopolies are so dangerous. That's why news and information from small players like us is critical. We are actually injecting vitality and health into the body politic. We're injecting it because we're placing thoughts that are never ever discussed. We're placing thoughts that actually consider the flaw in the financial system, the deliberate monopolising of news and information, the deliberate monopolising of industry, of actually claiming ownership of the raw materials of the world as their own. The raw materials, the coal, the iron ore, the aluminum, the glass, the electricity, the water. Look at what's going on in California. The monopolists are claiming ownership. They're actually destroying the reserves of water in order to force the price up, rather than actually have the price come down with an abundance. This is what it's about. It's about monopoly manipulation. And of course, we say, oh, the Cultural Revolution, Mao's China, all that sort of stuff. It's the oligarchs who control these slave states, these communist slave states. It's the oligarchs. You have a look at the oligarchs in China, the oligarchs in Russia. There's 7 or something bankers, central bankers at the collapse of the Soviet Union. It was never a collapse. The central bankers, there was 7 of them. They owned the assets of the entire Soviet Union. And here it was supposedly collapse, and what happens? A couple of bankers get disappeared out of the country, stay and you'll get shot, and Putin moves into power, and look what happened. He won't let it go either, because the natural law of the failure, if you like, of human nature, the flaw in human nature, that power is a corrupting influence, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Great men are normally, or generally, bad men, and Putin is no exception. Your thoughts, please, and I'll call it closing comments. Please, Robert Klinck.
Well, the centralization of power is visible in many areas, but it is absolute in the field of finance. And I think this COVID experience we've gone through has revealed how absolutely dangerous that situation is, because we have depended upon institutions and professional bodies and so on to deal with the public in an honest way. But it's obvious that the members of these associations, to a great extent, have been intimidated into going along with a false narrative. And why is this? It's because they depend for their income, for their means of living and supporting their families on this salary that can be cut off at any time by their professional body or their employer in some other way. And the employers are dependent in their own way on the provision of financial credit. Practically every business is settled on the basis of financial credit. They've got, a line of credit at the bank, and this applies to the media, it applies to business, it applies to professional people. So in effect, we like to think that we're a free society, but the fact that we're a slave society has been completely exposed by this COVID crisis, and the fact that the people we want to trust and probably who would like to be trustworthy, we cannot trust, because they're all under this coercive power of finance. And the social credit proposal of Major Douglas was, to the maximum extent, to establish every individual in a position of financial independence. It's a revolutionary idea, something that you won't hear discussed in any academic dissertation or in any establishment news agency or on any broadcasting system, because they're all enslaved by this system. But Douglas posited that this should be the goal of economics, and that indeed this is the only goal that is consistent with Christian philosophy. We have all these Christians these days so completely dominated themselves by the financial institutions. Well, what did Christ do? He threw the money changers out of the temple. You don't see many examples of that in Christian communities these days. But there has to be an understanding of the fact that the financial system is not something that is naturally inherent in the way things must be done. It's a system that has been contrived, developed, and it was developed by people who wanted it to benefit them to the maximum extent. And a part of this benefiting them to the maximum extent is giving them control over the resources of the world. Well, it's very interesting that the socialists and the financiers have the same goal, which is to concentrate power in few hands so that the rest of society can be dominated. The social credit idea that was developed by Douglas and expressed with such really startling clarity in his writings. It's a complete revelation if you read those thoughts that he produced, and thoughts that were not just abstract, but were actually tied to real analysis of what goes on in the economy and the relationship of finance to the economy. These were, well, it's the signpost for the liberation of humanity, and a tragedy that so few people know about it, and now a real tragedy because the communists in China have stolen the terminology of social credit in order to throw real confusion into the situation. It doesn't seem quite as if it would be a coincidence, but it might be. I don't know. It's a strange thing that they come up with exactly the same term to describe a system that is the opposite of the social credit that Douglas advocated. But just think of that principle he enunciated, that our economy, to the extent possible, should be oriented toward establishing every individual in a position of financial independence. So we can, if the government is misbehaving, thumb our noses at it and not cooperate with it and shut down its plans that the population do not support. We can't do that today because the government, which is tied in with the financial institutions, can shut down our access to the means of living, which is a source of income.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Robert. Before I give you the floor, Wally, I'm just going to cut across to our website while it's clear in my mind. alor.org, under the Social Credit Library here, and in the middle of it you will find Douglas CH and his writings there, and you will find the Monopoly of Credit. There it is there, the Monopoly of Credit. You will find all of his writings that I've been able to get my hands on, and in this case 119 pages, and you can buy the books. Yes, you can buy the books through our Veritas Books. You'll find a list of Douglas's books there under Social Credit. You can do that, but the more important point is that the information is there. It's readily available for you, and it's accessible anywhere around the world, and that to me is the key. This is the if you like, it's to me it's of an equivalent time of when the Latin, if you like, the Latin versions of the Bible were translated into the native tongues, so that people could have their own, what do the scriptures say, what do they mean, and put their own scholarship into it. And this is the same. This is the same in the sense that this is the financial economic system looked at in the brilliant light of Douglas, but more importantly of the Christian revelation of what is the purpose of man, what is the chief aim of man. It's to know God and to enjoy him forever. Your thoughts and closing comments, please, Wallace Klinck.
Well, the thing with it is human beings are capable of association, and in association they seek out new knowledge and new techniques. They learn new techniques. They produce new things. This leads to a more rich and abundant economy and life in general. And that is, if you go to economics today as it's taught, you will find that it is the most incredible accumulated body of terminology, which is obviously just fabricated right out of nothing, and it means nothing. People associate for a purpose, and that purpose is human satisfaction, and it's not that complicated. They've made economics so abstruse that if you get involved in it, you shortly will not have the foggiest notion of where you are. We produce goods and services for the use of mankind, and it's a matter of not only producing it, but making sure that it's distributed. And that is basically what economics is. It's not a whole bunch of mathematical formulas and theoretical concepts and precepts and things which make an income a career for careerists who actually draw from the public purse in order to carry on with all this nonsense. And it confuses people as to the whole nature of human association in the economic sphere. It's not that complicated, but it has to be carried on in a rational and functional manner where people get the benefits of the association in which they've engaged. So let's cut all the nonsense and get down to cases.
No worries. Thank you for that, Wally. That's exactly right. To cut all the nonsense and get down to how it actually is. The rubber hitting the road. The industry can produce more than enough. China is demonstrating that one nation can actually produce virtually more than enough for the entire world. That's the level of technology that we've got. And the assets, the raw assets that are there, available to be converted into usable products. Every nation has got almost a sufficiency, and yet we're looking all directed towards, what do you call it, the manufacturing base, the machine engine of the world, China, when in actual fact we could have our own machine engine in our own nation. And of course that was part of the deconstruction of the Western industry through, I think it was the Lima Agreement, the Lima Declaration, never signed, never ratified, but certainly implemented into each free world nation to deconstruct their industry, deconstruct it, actually deliberately shut it down. And I've lived through that to see it. Through the 70s, 80s, 90s, we saw our shipyards shut down, our steel shut down. 2 car manufacturers in Adelaide were shut down, 2 car manufacturers. And really, we had the engine room, if you like, we had the apprentice capital of Australia was around the Iron Triangle, several hundred kilometres to the north of Adelaide, which was, of course, Broken Hill Steel and the shipbuilding and the steelworks. And we had the coal mines there that provided the power generation at Lee Creek. And we had it all. And all of that has been shut down to the point where the last power station in that area was dynamited by you've got to call it, it's not Marxist, it's Maoist. This is a cultural revolution that they hate progress, they hate industry, they hate self-reliance. They want us all to be under a world slave state. And that's where our politics is taking us. Don't think it's not. This is certainly where it is. And I noted when I was referring earlier on to the demise of the Conservative Party in South Australia, they're declaring it. They do not want Conservatives in the Conservative Party. They only want communists. They only want communists. They have taken over the Conservative Party in South Australia. And I've been declaring that since I've been writing in the On Target, that the communists have taken over the Conservative Party every state and federally. And there is no Conservative. There is no Conservative grouping. And it's actually up to the Conservatives, traditional Labor as well, to actually find their own voice. To re-find their own voice, they must do it. We must do it. You must do everything that you can to help find that traditional voice in Australia, in Canada, in England, in America, in the free world, through Europe. We must find our traditional voice, and that is rooted in freedom. Freedom. And freedom only ever came from Christianity. Freedom only ever came from Christianity because it showed the intrinsic value of every single individual. The soul of Donald Trump, of Joe Stalin, of Adolf Hitler, doesn't matter who, of Arnis Luks. Every soul is important, and every soul must be given every opportunity to find expression. I think it's in the Greater Catechism, the Lesser Catechism, the chief aim of man is to know God and to love him and enjoy him forever. That is the chief aim. That is the whole purpose of government, of society, of culture, of every single institution, including industry, is to promote an opportunity for that individual to find expression. And you won't see that in collectivism, communism, doesn't matter what it is, any sort of centralism, you won't see it. And it's the denial of the uniqueness of the individual. That's what we're experiencing in this Maoist cultural revolution. They deny the individual. It's a philosophical cleavage, one or the other. Either free, moral, responsible, or a slave to a totalitarian bureaucracy. This is the choices we're facing at this time in history, in our culture. Thank you so much, Robert and Wally, for today. It's always been good. We're just tipping over the hour now. It's always good, and today is no different. How so very important we come back to philosophy, because that's where all of this is rooted. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks at the Crossroads.